Somebody came in. They broke in and stabbed my babies. My babies are dying. The voice was breathless, panicked, and trembling a young mother's cry for help. The caller was Darlie Routier, 26 years old, beautiful, blonde, and blood-soaked. When the police arrived, the scene that greeted them was the stuff of nightmares. In the living room of the Routier home, two small boys, Devon, 6, and Damon, 5, lay covered in blood. The youngest still clung to life, gasping faintly before succumbing moments later. Nearby, their mother stood dazed and screaming, her white nightshirt drenched in red. A deep slash ran across her throat, missing her carotid artery by less than 2 millimeters. At first glance, it seemed simple, a brutal home invasion gone horribly wrong. But as the flashing lights painted the house blue and red, something about the scene felt off. Darlie told investigators a story that seemed torn from a horror film. She'd fallen asleep with her boys watching TV on the couch. In the early morning hours, she awoke to a man standing over her, tall, shadowy, a knife glinting in his hand. She screamed. He fled toward the kitchen. She chased him, feeling a searing pain as the blade sliced across her throat, and ARM.B by the time she turned back. Her children were covered in blood. Officers searched the house for signs of a break-in. A window screen in the garage was cut, but no fingerprints, no footprints in the mulch, no trail of blood outside. The knife used in the killings came from the Routier's own kitchen. Still, Darlie's injuries looked serious, and she was rushed to the hospital. Her husband, Darren Routier, was upstairs with their infant son, Drake. He told police he'd been asleep until he heard Darlie's screams at the hospital. Darlie repeated her story again and again, voice hoarse, face pale. But as detectives listened, they began to pick apart the inconsistencies. Why would an intruder kill 2 boys, stab their mother, and leave without taking anything? Why was the blood pattern on the kitchen floor inconsistent with her version of events? And why, in a moment meant to be pure chaos, did it all seem so staged? In the days that followed, investigators from the Rowlett Police Department combed through every inch of the Routier home. What they found shifted the focus from an intruder to Darlie herself. The knife Darlie said the attacker used matched one from her own knife block. The window screen was cut with a knife from that same block. The fibers from the screen were later found on the knife blade. Blood spatter analysis revealed that Darlie's movements didn't align with her claims. Drops of her blood on the kitchen counter suggested she'd been standing bleeding long after the attack supposedly ended. Police theorized she might have inflicted her own wounds to make the crime look like a break-in. Then came the silly string, video the footage that would haunt Darlie forever. 8 days after her son's deaths, on what would have been Devon's 7th birthday, Darlie, her family, and friends gathered at the cemetery. They prayed, they cried, and they released balloons. Then, moments later, Darlie began laughing and spraying silly string over the graves, music playing in the background. When the footage was aired on TV, it ignited outrage. To the public and the prosecution, it looked like cold indifference, proof that she wasn't grieving but celebrating. The case was no longer about a grieving mother. It was about a monster hiding behind mascara and motherhood. The prosecution painted a grim picture. The Routiers were struggling financially. Darlie, they argued, was drowning in debt, obsessed with material things a young woman used to luxury, now cornered by bills and stress. Her husband's business was failing. The house was mortgaged. She'd written in her diary just days before the murders. "I feel like I can't take it anymore. Sometimes I wish I was gone." Prosecutors claimed Darlie planned the murders in a desperate bid for sympathy and relief, that she snapped under the pressure and killed her sons to appear as a victim. But Darlie's defense fought back. They showed her wounds to the jury, a 2-inch slash across her throat that came dangerously close to severing a major artery. Could someone really do that to themselves, they asked? Then came the evidence the prosecution couldn't explain. A bloody sock found 75 yards away from the house, containing blood from both boys impossible, the defense argued, for Darlie to have placed there herself while bleeding so severely. Unidentified fingerprints on the coffee table and utility room door that didn't match anyone in the family. The lack of Darlie's blood in the garage, where the supposed intruder escaped. Was this really a cold-blooded act or a flawed investigation rushing to judgment? The trial began in January 1997 in Kerrville, Texas, after being moved due to heavy media attention. Every camera lens focused on Darlie, the blonde mother, now wearing a somber expression, her wrists in chains. The prosecution leaned heavily on emotion. They replayed the silly string video again and again, pausing on her laughter. Them. That moment was the crime scene, a psychological snapshot of guilt. After weeks of testimony, The jury took just 8 hours to deliver a verdict, guilty of capital murder. Darlie Routier was sentenced to death by lethal injection. But the story didn't end there. In the decades since her conviction, doubts have only grown. DNA testing has been requested multiple times, each time uncovering new uncertainties. Modern analysis of the unidentified fingerprints and the bloody sock could one day reveal more. Even some members of the original investigative team have expressed regret over how quickly suspicion turned toward Darlie. From her cell on Texas death row, Darlie has never wavered in her claim of innocence. In interviews, her voice carries the weight of years lost and the ache of a mother who insists she didn't kill her children. "I loved my boys more than life," she once said. "If people could see what really happened, they'd know I'm telling the truth." Her youngest son, Drake, just 7 months old at the time of the murders, grew up believing in his mother's innocence. He has since spoken publicly in her defense, saying, "My mom didn't do this. I want her home." Still, the state stands firm. To them, the evidence speaks clearly. The Silly String video remains burned into the nation's memory, a chilling symbol of a mother's betrayal. Yet to others, it's a story of misinterpretation and human grief, captured in the worst possible moment. Years later, when advanced forensic testing finally began re-examining the case, something curious happened. The unidentified fingerprint, long thought to be a mystery, still didn't match Darlie. DNA from the sock remained inconclusive. Each new test seemed to raise more questions than answers. Was the intruder real after all? Had investigators, desperate for a culprit, built their case around what they wanted to see? The truth remains buried beneath layers of blood evidence, courtroom theatrics, and the power of perception. In the end, Darlie Routier's story is more than a murder mystery. Almost 30 years later, the question still echoes in the minds of those who followed the case. Was Darlie Routier a murderer or the ultimate victim of circumstance?